I inherited my grandfather's ranch in New Mexico, but the locals warned me, never go to Black Ridge after dark. I should have listened, because some inheritances come with a price written in blood, and some family secrets are buried for a reason. What I found in that desert changed everything I thought I knew about human evolution, and made me question whether humanity deserves to survive at all. When Sarah Mitchell inherits mysterious property in Black Ridge, New Mexico, she discovers her family's darkest secret, a supernatural curse that's been waiting 23 years for her return. With each passing night, she's transforming into something inhuman. But the real horror isn't what she's becoming. It's the choice she'll have to make to save our species. Will she sacrifice her humanity to become humanity's savior? Or destroy everything to preserve our right to choose our own fate? The lawyer's office smelled of old leather and broken dreams. Sarah Mitchell sat across from Mr. Hendricks, her fingers trembling as she held the deed to a property she'd never heard her family mention. The yellow document bore an address in Black Ridge, New Mexico, a place that sounded like something from a forgotten Western movie. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My grandfather never mentioned owning land in New Mexico." Mr. Hendricks adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your grandfather, Henry Walker, purchased this property in 1978. According to our records, he sold it in 1980 but retained mineral rights and certain obligations." The way he said obligations made Sarah's skin crawl. "Upon his death, everything reverts to his living heir. That would be you." Sarah stared at the deed. She was drowning in student loans. Her job at the marketing firm barely covered rent, and her landlord had already served an eviction notice. This mysterious inheritance felt like a lifeline thrown from beyond the grave. "What kind of obligations?" she asked. The lawyer shuffled through papers, avoiding her eyes. "The documentation is unclear. Something about maintaining the property boundaries and ensuring certain areas remain undisturbed. Your grandfather was very specific about these terms. How much is the land worth? Conservative estimate? 200,000. Maybe more depending on development potential." Mr. Hendricks leaned forward. "However, I should mention that the current owner, a Mr. Dale Turner, has been trying to sell for years without success. The local real estate market is challenging." Sarah's heart raced. $200,000 would solve every problem in her life. She could pay off her debts, maybe even start the photography business she'd always dreamed about. But something in the lawyer's expression warned her that this windfall came with strings attached. "I'll need to see the property first," she said. Mr. Hendricks nodded slowly. "I expected as much. I've taken the liberty of arranging temporary accommodation in the nearest town, Roswell. It's about an hour's drive to Black Ridge." He handed her a manila envelope. "Everything you need is in here. Keys, maps, contact information for Mr. Turner." As Sarah stood to leave, the lawyer's hand caught her wrist. His grip was cold, urgent. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Your grandfather left specific instructions. Under no circumstances should you visit the property during a new moon. He was adamant about this." "Why?" Mr. Hendricks released her wrist and stepped back. "I honestly don't know, but Henry Walker was one of the most practical men I ever met. If he felt strongly enough to put that warning in his will, I'd suggest you heed it." Sarah left the office with more questions than answers. As she walked to her car, she pulled out her phone to check the lunar calendar. Relief washed over her when she saw the moon was currently waxing. She had almost 2 weeks before the next new moon. The drive from Denver to Roswell took 8 hours. As the landscape shifted from green mountains to endless desert, Sarah felt increasingly isolated. Cell service became spotty, then disappeared entirely. The radio picked up only static and distant Spanish stations. By the time she reached Roswell, the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of dried blood. The motel was exactly what she'd expected, a row of identical doors facing a parking lot filled with tumbleweeds and broken dreams. Her room smelled of disinfectant and cigarettes. As she unpacked her camera equipment, Sarah tried to shake the feeling that she was making a terrible mistake. She ordered pizza and spent the evening researching Black Ridge online. What she found was troubling. The town had been abandoned in the early 1980s after a series of unexplained livestock deaths. The few articles she could find mentioned wild animal attacks and mass hysteria, but the details were vague, almost deliberately obscured. One forum post caught her attention. A user named Desert Watcher had written, "Don't go to Black Ridge after dark. The government won't tell you why the town died, but the old-timers know. Some hungers can't be satisfied, some curses can't be broken. The land remembers everything." Sarah closed her laptop and tried to sleep, but every sound outside her window, the wind through the desert scrub, the distant howl of coyotes, the rumble of trucks on the highway, seemed to carry a warning she couldn't quite understand. Tomorrow she would drive to Black Ridge and see her inheritance for herself. But tonight, as she lay in the darkness listening to the desert sing its ancient songs, Sarah Mitchell had no idea that she was about to step into a nightmare that had been waiting 23 years for her return. The drive to Black Ridge took Sarah through landscapes that seemed pulled from another planet. Red mesas rose like sleeping giants from the desert floor, their shadows creating a patchwork of light and darkness that shifted with every mile. The GPS signal had died 30 minutes ago, leaving her to navigate by the hand-drawn map Mr. Hendricks had provided. She almost missed the turnoff. A weathered sign, barely visible through the dust and bullet holes, read, "Black Ridge, Pop 247. Someone had scratched out the numbers and written 0 in red paint that looked suspiciously like dried blood. The dirt road stretched ahead like a scar across the landscape. Sarah's Honda Civic wasn't built for this terrain, and every pothole sent shockwaves through her spine. After 20 minutes of bone-jarring travel, she crested a small hill and saw the remains of Black Ridge spread out below her. It was a ghost town in the truest sense. Maybe 24 buildings clustered around what had once been Main Street, their windows dark and empty, their roofs partially collapsed. Tumbleweeds had claimed the streets, and the desert was slowly reclaiming everything humanity had tried to build here. Sarah parked in front of what had been the general store and stepped out of her car. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just an oppressive quiet that seemed to press against her eardrums. She raised her camera and took a few shots, but something felt wrong about documenting this place. It felt like trespassing. According to the map, her grandfather's ranch was 3 miles south of town. Sarah climbed back into her car and followed a barely visible track that wound between scattered Joshua trees and sun-bleached animal bones. The ranch appeared suddenly, as if it had materialized from the heat shimmer. A wooden sign hanging by one chain read, "Walker Ranch, Est 1978. The house was a simple adobe structure with a wraparound porch, surprisingly well-preserved considering its abandonment. Behind it stood a barn, several outbuildings, and the remnants of animal pens. Sarah parked and grabbed her camera bag. The silence here was different from the town, not empty but expectant, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The front door was locked, but the key from Mr. Hendricks worked perfectly. The hinges groaned as the door swung open, releasing a smell of dust and something else, something metallic and unpleasant that reminded Sarah of pennies left in the rain. The interior was frozen in time. Furniture sat exactly where it had been left, covered in dust sheets like sleeping ghosts. A calendar on the kitchen wall showed October 1979, its pages yellowed with age. Sarah moved through the rooms, documenting everything with her camera, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. In what had been the master bedroom, she found a trunk at the foot of the bed. Inside were photo albums, birth certificates, and other family documents. But what caught her attention was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her grandfather's meticulous handwriting. The entries began normally enough, notes about weather, livestock, and ranch maintenance. But as Sarah read further, the tone shifted. Her grandfather wrote about strange sounds at night, animals found dead in impossible ways, and a ranch hand named Elias who seemed to be hiding something terrible. One entry made her blood run cold. Elias came to me today, begging me to chain him up during the new moon. He says the fever comes with the darkness, and he can't control what happens when it takes him. God help me, I'm starting to believe him. Sarah closed the journal and looked around the bedroom with new eyes. Dark stains on the wooden floor caught her attention, stains that could have been anything, but somehow she knew they were blood. A sound from outside made her freeze. It was barely audible, like wind through dry grass, but it carried an almost musical quality that raised the hair on her arms. Sarah crept to the window and peered through the dusty glass. A figure stood at the edge of the property, so still it might have been a scarecrow. But there was something wrong with its proportions. Too tall, too thin, its limbs hanging at unnatural angles. As Sarah watched, the figure's head turned toward the house with mechanical precision. Sarah ducked below the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she worked up the courage to look again, the figure was gone. But in the dust outside, she could see fresh footprints leading toward the barn. Against every instinct screaming at her to flee, Sarah grabbed a flashlight from her camera bag and stepped outside. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. She followed the footprints, her camera ready, though she wasn't sure what she hoped to capture. The barn door stood slightly ajar. Sarah pushed it open and stepped inside, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The space was mostly empty except for some old farming equipment and stacks of rotting hay bales, but along the far wall she found something that made her stomach lurch. Heavy chains hung from iron rings bolted into the wooden beams. The metal was dark with what looked like dried blood, and the floor beneath showed deep scratch marks, as if something with claws had fought desperately against its restraints. Near the chains, Sarah found a metal box half buried under moldy hay. Inside were dozens of medallions on tarnished silver chains, each bearing different phases of the moon. At the bottom of the box was a note written in the same hand as the journal. "If the fever takes me, these won't be enough. Tell Henry to burn everything. Tell him the curse dies with me." Sarah photographed everything, her hands shaking as she worked. This was no ordinary family history. This was evidence of something dark and ancient that had taken root in Black Ridge. And somehow her grandfather had been right in the middle of it. As she prepared to leave the barn, a new sound reached her ears. It started low, almost below the threshold of hearing, then rose in pitch and volume until it became unmistakably what it was: a howl. Not the yip of a coyote or the bay of a domestic dog, but something that seemed to come from a human throat twisted into an inhuman shape. The sound echoed across the desert, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Sarah ran for her car, clutching the metal box and her camera bag. As she fumbled with the keys, she caught movement in her peripheral vision, shadows flowing between the buildings like liquid darkness. The engine turned over on the third try. As Sarah sped away from the ranch, she looked in her rearview mirror and saw the figure standing in the road behind her. Even at this distance, she could see its eyes reflecting her taillights like twin red stars. She didn't stop driving until she reached the motel in Roswell. Only then, safe behind a locked door with the lights blazing, did Sarah allow herself to examine what she'd found. But as she spread the photographs across her bed, she realized that her problems were just beginning. Because in every single image she'd taken at the ranch, lurking in shadows and standing just at the edge of the frame, was the same impossibly tall figure. And in the last photo she'd taken, a shot of the barn's interior, she could clearly see a pair of glowing eyes watching her from the darkness. The figure had been there the entire time, following her every move, and now it knew she'd found its secret. Sarah spent a restless night poring over the photographs on her laptop, zooming in on every shadow, every unexplained shape. The figure appeared in 17 different shots, always at the periphery, always watching. In the harsh fluorescent light of the motel room, she tried to convince herself it was pareidolia, the human tendency to see faces in random patterns. But deep down, she knew what she'd captured was real. The next morning, She drove to Roswell's public library, a small building that looked like it had been built in the 1960s and never updated. The librarian, a woman in her 70s with kind eyes and silver hair, looked up from her desk as Sarah approached. "Can I help you, dear?" "I'm researching the history of Black Ridge," Sarah said, "specifically what happened there in the late 1970s. The librarian's expression shifted subtly. "You're not the first person to come asking about Black Ridge. May I ask why you're interested?" Sarah hesitated. "I inherited property there. I'm trying to understand why the town was abandoned." "I see." The librarian stood slowly. "My name is Margaret Delacroix. I've been the librarian here for 43 years, and I've watched people come and go asking about Black Ridge. Most of them leave town within a day or two. The smart ones, anyway." Margaret led Sarah to a section of the library marked Local History. She pulled several folders from a filing cabinet and set them on a nearby table. "These are the official records," Margaret said. "Newspaper articles, government reports, census data. But if you really want to understand what happened in Black Ridge, you'll need to talk to people who were actually there." Sarah opened the first folder. Inside were photocopied newspaper clippings from the Roswell Daily Record, dating from 1979 to 1981. The headlines told a story of escalating strangeness: livestock deaths plague Black Ridge ranchers, wild animal attacks continue, entire town evacuated after unprecedented incident. But the articles themselves were frustratingly vague. They mentioned unusual predator behavior and atmospheric disturbances without providing any real details. It was as if the reporters had been deliberately obscuring the truth. "The government came through in 1980, Margaret said quietly. Said there had been a chemical spill from some kind of classified research facility, bought out every property owner, relocated the entire population. But that was all lies." "How do you know?" Margaret glanced around the empty library, then leaned closer. "Because I lived in Black Ridge until I was 16. My family had a small ranch about 5 miles north of town. We left in March of 1980, 3 days after the burning." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What burning?" "The Walker place." Margaret's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Henry Walker and his grandson found something in their barn that night, something that had been living among them, pretending to be human. They burned it alive, but the screaming—" She shuddered. "The whole town heard it. It wasn't the sound any animal should make." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Margaret the photograph from her grandfather's barn. The chains, the scratch marks, the blood stains. Margaret went pale. "Sweet Jesus. You've been there, haven't you? To the ranch?" "Yesterday I found this box too." Sarah showed her the lunar medallions. "And I saw something. A figure watching me." Margaret stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking Main Street. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decades-old fear. "There are things in this world that science can't explain, that government agencies try to cover up. Black Ridge sits on one of those places where the veil between worlds is thin. The Navajo knew about it. That's why they never built permanent settlements there. They called it the hungry ground. What does that mean? It means the land itself is cursed. It takes people, changes them, makes them into something else. Something that's always hungry, always hunting." Margaret turned back to Sarah. "Your grandfather's ranch hand, Elias Crow, wasn't the first person to be infected. He won't be the last." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's air conditioning. "Are you saying the curse is still active?" "I'm saying that fire doesn't kill everything. Some hungers survive burning. Some curses pass from generation to generation." Margaret returned to the table and picked up one of the lunar medallions. These were meant to control the transformation, to bind the curse to specific lunar phases. But they're just silver and hope. They don't cure anything. Then why did Elias have so many of them? Because he was trying to find the right combination, the right pattern. He was looking for a way to break the curse entirely. Margaret examined the medallion more closely. But according to the old stories, there's only one way to truly end it, which is, the cursed bloodline has to choose extinction. The last carrier has to die without passing the curse on to anyone else. Margaret's eyes met Sarah's. "Tell me, dear, do you have any children?" Sarah shook her head and Margaret looked relieved. "Then maybe there's still hope. But you need to stay away from Black Ridge, especially during the new moon. The transformation is strongest then, when the lunar influence is weakest." Sarah spent the rest of the day in the library, reading every document Margaret could provide. She learned that the official evacuation of Black Ridge had been swift and thorough. Within a week, every resident had been relocated, and the town declared a federal environmental hazard zone. No one was allowed to return. But as Sarah read between the lines, she began to see a different story. Several evacuees had disappeared during transport to their new homes. Others had been found dead in their government-provided housing within months of leaving Black Ridge. The official cause was always the same: complications related to chemical exposure. As the sun began to set, Margaret locked up the library and walked Sarah to her car. "There's someone you should talk to," Margaret said. "Dale Turner. He bought your grandfather's ranch in 1980, but he's never been able to leave. The curse has him now, just like it had Elias. Where can I find him? He runs a gas station about 10 miles south of here, right at the turnoff to Black Ridge. But be careful. Dale's not entirely human anymore, especially as it gets dark. And whatever you do, don't let him know you're Henry Walker's granddaughter. As far as Dale's concerned, your family owes him a debt that can never be repaid." That evening, Sarah sat in her motel room staring at the lunar calendar on her phone. The new moon was still 10 days away, but she could feel something building in the air, like the electric charge before a thunderstorm. Every hour that passed brought her closer to a confrontation she didn't understand, but couldn't avoid. She thought about Margaret's words: the cursed bloodline has to choose extinction. Sarah had come to Black Ridge hoping to solve her financial problems. Instead, she'd discovered that she carried a curse in her very DNA, a hunger that might already be awakening inside her. And the only way to break it was to ensure she never had children, to let the Walker bloodline die with her. As she prepared for bed, Sarah caught herself checking the locks on her door 3 times. Outside her window, the desert stretched endlessly under a star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, Dale Turner waited at his gas station, carrying his own burden of moonlight and madness. And in 10 days, when the moon went dark, Sarah would have to decide whether she was brave enough to face whatever was calling to her from the hungry ground of Black Ridge. Tomorrow she would drive to Dale's gas station and learn the rest of the truth. Tonight, she could only lie awake listening to the desert wind and wondering if she'd already waited too long to escape. Dale Turner's gas station squatted beside the highway like a steel and concrete tumor. 2 ancient pumps stood guard over cracked asphalt, their displays showing prices from a decade ago. A neon sign flickered weakly in the morning sun. Turner's last stop: gas, food, ammo. The word last seemed especially ominous. Sarah parked next to the building and took a deep breath. Through the grimy windows, she could see shelves stocked with canned goods, motor oil, and what looked like hunting supplies. A bell chimed as she pushed open the door, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. The man behind the counter looked up from a newspaper crossword puzzle. He was probably in his 60s, with graying hair and deep lines etched around his eyes. But there was something wrong with those eyes. They were too bright, too aware, like an animal's eyes caught in headlights. "Help you?" His voice carried a slight rasp, as if his throat had been damaged long ago. "Are you Dale Turner?" He set down his pencil and studied her face with unsettling intensity. "Depends who's asking." "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I inherited some property near Black Ridge, and I was told you might be able to tell me about the area's history." Dale's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed his hands tighten almost imperceptibly on the counter. "Property near Black Ridge, you say? What kind of property?" "A ranch. It belonged to my grandfather, Henry Walker." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Dale's face went ashen, and he stepped back from the counter as if Sarah had struck him. His nostrils flared, and she could swear she heard a low growling sound from deep in his chest. "Henry Walker," he repeated slowly. "That son of a bitch, Henry Walker." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward the pepper spray in her purse, but Dale held up a trembling hand. No, I'm sorry. It's not your fault." He ran both hands through his hair, and Sarah noticed his fingernails were unusually long and thick. "It's just, hearing that name brings back memories. Bad memories." "What happened between you and my grandfather?" Dale laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What happened? Your grandfather destroyed my life, that's what happened. But I suppose from his perspective, he was trying to save it." He gestured toward a small seating area near the back of the store. "Sit down. This is going to take a while." Sarah followed him to a booth that might have been salvaged from a 1950s diner. Dale poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing for hours, then sat across from her. "I bought the Walker Ranch in February of 1980, he began. "Your grandfather was desperate to sell. He'd gotten some kind of government buyout offer for the whole area, but he needed to unload the property fast. Sold it to me for half what it was worth." "Why were you interested in ranch land in the middle of nowhere?" "Because I was young and stupid and thought I could make a go of it. I had big dreams, cattle, crops, maybe even a guest ranch for city folks who wanted to play cowboy." Dale's laugh was bitter. "Your grandfather tried to warn me. Kept talking about obligations and responsibilities that came with the land. I thought he was just some crazy old desert rat." Dale stared into his coffee cup as if searching for answers in the dark liquid. "The first month was normal. I moved into the house, fixed up the fences, bought some cattle. But then the dreams started." "What kind of dreams?" "Hunting dreams. I'd dream I was running through the desert on 4 legs, chasing something. Deer, rabbits, sometimes people. I'd wake up exhausted, covered in sweat, with dirt under my fingernails and the taste of blood in my mouth." Dale looked up at Sarah, and she saw genuine fear in his strange eyes. The dreams got stronger every night, especially as the moon got smaller. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. "Did you find anything unusual on the property? Any artifacts or... You mean the chains in the barn, the lunar medallions, the room behind the cellar where someone had scratched calendar markings into the stone walls?" Dale nodded grimly. "I found all of it, and like a fool I ignored your grandfather's warnings." "What warnings?" "He left a letter in the house, sealed and addressed to whoever bought the property. It explained everything. The curse, the transformations, what had happened to Elias Crow. He said the land itself was infected with something ancient and hungry, and that anyone who stayed too long would become part of it." Dale's hands were shaking now. "He begged me to burn the house and barn, salt the earth and leave, but I thought he was senile." "When did you realize he was telling the truth?" "The first new moon after I moved in. April 12, 1980. Dale's voice became almost mechanical, as if he were reciting a well-rehearsed story. "I woke up naked in the desert, 15 miles from the ranch, covered in blood that wasn't mine. Next to me was what was left of a coyote, torn apart with bare hands." Sarah set down her coffee cup with trembling fingers. The similarities to her grandfather's journal were unmistakable. "I tried to leave after that," Dale continued, "packed everything I owned, and drove toward the highway. But every time I got more than a few miles from the ranch, the fever would start. Burning headaches, nausea, muscle spasms. The further I got from Black Ridge, the worse it became. By the time I reached Albuquerque, I was hallucinating. I had to turn back. The curse wouldn't let you leave. The curse is tied to the land, and now I'm tied to the curse. I can't travel more than 50 miles from Black Ridge without becoming violently ill. This gas station is about as far as I can manage." Dale gestured around the cramped store. "I've been trapped here for 23 years. Sarah felt a wave of sympathy for the broken man across from her, but something else nagged at her attention. "You said my grandfather destroyed your life, but it sounds like he tried to warn you." Dale's expression hardened. "Your grandfather knew exactly what would happen to me. The curse doesn't just randomly infect people. It seeks out specific bloodlines, specific genetic markers. Henry Walker sold me that property knowing I was susceptible. How could he know that? Because he'd done his research. Did you know Elias Crow was my uncle? Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. Your uncle? My mother's brother. Elias came to work for your grandfather in 1977, already carrying the curse. He'd picked it up from our grandmother, who got it from her father, who'd been affected during some kind of military expedition in the 1890s. Dale leaned forward, his strange eyes boring into Sarah's. The curse runs in families. It follows bloodlines like a river follows the easiest path downhill. So when my grandfather sold you the ranch, he was passing the curse from one infected family to another, getting it away from his own bloodline. Dale's voice was filled with decades of accumulated rage. Henry Walker saved his family by sacrificing mine. Sarah stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her coffee cup. The implications were staggering. If Dale was right, then her grandfather hadn't been an innocent victim of supernatural forces. He'd been a calculating man who deliberately endangered another family to protect his own. I need to go, she said. Dale grabbed her wrist as she turned to leave. His grip was incredibly strong and his skin felt fever-hot against hers. You can't run from this, he said urgently. The curse is in your blood now, just like it's in mine. I can smell it on you, that metallic scent that gets stronger every day. How long have you been having the dreams? Sarah tried to pull away, but Dale's grip tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. The hunting dreams, the taste of blood, the feeling that something inside you is waking up. Dale's eyes were growing brighter, and Sarah noticed that his canine teeth seemed longer than they should be. How many days until the new moon, Sarah? Let go of me. 8 days. 8 days until the moon goes dark and the change completes itself. Dale finally released her wrist, leaving red marks where his fingers had been. You can try to run, but the fever will bring you back. Just like it brought me back. Just like it brought your grandfather back every month for 2 years until he found a way to pass the curse on to someone else. Sarah backed toward the door, her heart hammering. You're lying. Am I? Then explain why you came back to Black Ridge in the first place. Explain why you didn't just sell the property sight unseen. Explain why you can't stop thinking about those photographs you took, about the figure watching you from the shadows. Dale smiled, revealing teeth that were definitely too sharp. The curse called you home, Sarah, just like it called me, just like it called Elias. Sarah fled the gas station and drove back toward Roswell with her hands shaking on the steering wheel. But even as she put distance between herself and Dale Turner, his words echoed in her mind. She thought about the dreams she'd been having since her grandfather's death, vague, violent images that she'd dismissed as stress. She thought about the strange compulsion that had driven her to Black Ridge instead of simply selling the property. And she thought about the metallic taste that had been growing stronger in her mouth over the past few days, like copper pennies dissolving on her tongue. That evening, alone in her motel room, Sarah stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her eyes looked brighter than usual, more alert. Her canine teeth seemed slightly more prominent, and when she smiled experimentally, she could swear she saw something predatory looking back at her. 8 days until the new moon. 8 days to figure out how to break a curse that might already be changing her into something inhuman. Outside her window, the desert wind carried the distant sound of howling, and for the first time since arriving in New Mexico, Sarah found herself wanting to howl back. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dale Turner's too bright gaze and felt the burning grip of his fingers on her wrist. But it wasn't fear of Dale that kept her awake. It was the growing certainty that he'd been telling the truth about everything. The dreams had started 3 weeks ago, right after her grandfather's funeral. She'd dismissed them as grief-induced nightmares, but now she remembered them with terrifying clarity. Running through moonlit forests on legs that weren't quite human, the taste of raw meat and the intoxicating scent of fear sweat. The sound of her own voice making sounds no human throat should produce. At dawn, Sarah drove back to Black Ridge. She needed to see the ranch again, to find evidence that would either confirm or disprove Dale's claims about her grandfather. The desert looked different in the morning light, less mysterious, more desolate. But as she approached the turnoff to the property, she noticed fresh tire tracks in the dust. Someone else had been here recently. The ranch house stood exactly as she'd left it, but Sarah could sense a change in the atmosphere. The oppressive silence had been replaced by something that felt almost like anticipation. She parked next to the house and grabbed her camera bag, but this time she also brought a large kitchen knife from the motel's complimentary breakfast area. The front door was still locked, but as Sarah fumbled with the key, she noticed muddy boot prints on the porch. Large prints with an unusual tread pattern that didn't match her own shoes. Someone had been here since yesterday. Inside, the house felt different, colder. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams seemed to move in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Sarah made her way to the master bedroom, where she'd found her grandfather's journal, but the trunk was empty. Everything was gone. The journal, the photographs, the family documents. But on the bed, someone had left a manila envelope with her name written across it in block letters. Sarah opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her grandfather's familiar handwriting. "Sarah, if you're reading this, then the curse has called you home just as I knew it would. I had hoped the bloodline would end with me, but fate has other plans. You have perhaps a week before the transformation completes itself. Use that time to choose. Accept what you're becoming or find the strength to break the chain forever. The answer lies where we burned Elias. Look for the red door. Henry." Below the message was a hand-drawn map showing a location about 2 miles east of the ranch house. Sarah stared at the paper until the words seemed to blur and shift. Her grandfather had known she would come here. Somehow he'd planned for this moment. A sound from outside made her freeze, the soft scrape of footsteps on gravel. Sarah crept to the bedroom window and peered through the dust-caked glass. A figure stood at the edge of the property, exactly where she'd seen it 2 days ago. But this time, she could make out more details. It was definitely human in shape, but wrong in every proportion. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung past its knees and a head that seemed to perch on its shoulders at an unnatural angle. It wore what might have been clothing, but the fabric hung in tatters that moved independently of any wind. As Sarah watched, the figure raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at the bedroom window. At her. Sarah ducked below the windowsill, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she found the courage to look again, the figure was walking toward the house with a strange, loping gait that covered ground much faster than should have been possible. She grabbed the envelope and ran for the back door, bursting into the harsh sunlight behind the house. The barn stood about 50 yards away, its door hanging open like a mouth. Sarah could hear footsteps on the front porch now, and the squeal of the front door opening. Instead of running for her car, some instinct drove her toward the barn. She sprinted across the dusty yard and dove through the open doorway, just as she heard the back door of the house slam open behind her. The barn was exactly as she'd left it. Chains hanging from the walls, scratch marks in the floor, the metal box still sitting where she'd found it. But now Sarah noticed something else. A trap door in the floor, partially hidden under moldy hay bales. According to her grandfather's map, she needed to find the red door. This had to be it. Heavy footsteps entered the barn behind her. Sarah didn't turn around as she grabbed the rusty handle and pulled the trap door open. A ladder led down into darkness that smelled of earth and old fire. She descended quickly, hearing the thing behind her make a sound like wind through broken glass. The underground chamber was larger than she'd expected, maybe 20 feet square, with stone walls that looked much older than the barn above. Ancient symbols had been carved into the rock, and the floor was covered with a thick layer of ash. This was where they'd burned Elias Crow. At the far end of the chamber stood a door painted deep red, its surface marked with the same lunar symbols Sarah had seen on the medallions. The paint was fresh, as if someone had recently restored it. As she approached, she could hear something behind the door, a rhythmic scratching sound like claws on stone. Above her, the thing in the barn let out a howl that shook dust from the ceiling. More footsteps echoed overhead. It wasn't alone. Sarah grasped the red door's handle and turned it. The door swung open to reveal another chamber, this one lit by dozens of candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. And there, sitting cross-legged in the center of the room, was her grandfather. Henry Walker looked exactly as she remembered him from childhood, except for his eyes. They glowed with the same unnatural brightness she'd seen in Dale Turner's gaze. And when he smiled, his teeth were long and sharp. "Hello, Sarah," he said in a voice like grinding stone. "I've been waiting for you to come home." Sarah's knees gave out, and she collapsed to the floor. "You're dead. I went to your funeral." "Death is a flexible concept in places like Black Ridge," Henry said. "The curse doesn't like to let go of what belongs to it. Even after the body dies, the hunger remains." He gestured around the candlelit chamber. "This is where I've been since 1980, watching over the ranch, making sure the curse stayed contained until my heir returned." "I don't understand." "The curse needs a bloodline to survive, Sarah. It passes from generation to generation, growing stronger each time. I tried to break the chain by passing it to the Crow family, but blood calls to blood. The curse wants a walker, and you're the last one." The scratching sounds above grew louder, and Sarah could hear multiple voices now, some human, some not. "They know you're here," Henry said. "The others who carry the curse. They're drawn to places of power during the transformation time. But don't worry. They can't enter this chamber. The symbols on the door protect us." "Us?" Henry's smile widened. "You're already changing, Sarah. I can smell it on you. In 3 days, when the moon goes dark, you'll complete the transformation and join us. Forever." Sarah backed toward the red door, but it had swung shut behind her. "I won't let that happen." "You don't have a choice. The curse is in your DNA now. It's rewriting you from the inside out, making you into something better than human. Something that can hunt, something that can survive." Henry stood slowly, his movements unnaturally fluid. Why fight it? Why cling to a life of struggle and disappointment when you could be perfect? "Because I'd rather be human and miserable than inhuman and satisfied." Henry laughed. Such noble words. But when the hunger takes you, when the bloodlust fills your veins like liquid fire, you'll understand. You'll embrace what you've become. Sarah pulled the kitchen knife from her bag. "Stay away from me." "A knife won't help you here, granddaughter. You can't kill something that's already dead." Henry began walking toward her, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. "But I can teach you to control the hunger. I can show you how to hunt without losing yourself completely." "I said stay away." Sarah lunged forward with the knife, aiming for Henry's chest. But he moved faster than humanly possible, catching her wrist and twisting until she dropped the weapon. His grip was like ice, and when he leaned close, she could smell death on his breath. "You have so much to learn," he whispered. "But we have all the time in the world." Above them, something heavy crashed against the barn floor. The scratching sounds had become a rhythmic pounding, as if multiple creatures were trying to break through the wooden planks. "They're getting impatient," Henry said. "Perhaps it's time for you to meet your new family." Sarah tried to pull away, but Henry's grip was too strong. With his free hand, he reached for the red door's handle. "Welcome home, Sarah Walker," he said as the door began to open. "Welcome to your true inheritance." The pounding overhead reached a crescendo, and Sarah heard the barn floor begin to splinter. In moments, she would be trapped in this underground chamber with her undead grandfather and whatever other horrors the curse had created. But as the red door swung open, Sarah saw something that made her heart race with desperate hope. Carved into the stone doorframe were symbols she hadn't noticed before, not lunar crescents, but crosses. And hanging from a chain around her grandfather's neck was a silver medallion she recognized from the metal box upstairs. Henry Walker wasn't just a victim of the curse. He was its guardian, its protector. And if Sarah could get that medallion away from him, she might still have a chance to escape. The only question was whether she could move fast enough to avoid becoming another guardian herself. The medallion around Henry's neck pulsed with a faint silver light, and Sarah realized it wasn't just jewelry. It was the source of his unnatural vitality. If she could break the chain, maybe she could disrupt whatever force was keeping him anchored to this place. "You're looking at my anchor," Henry said, noticing her gaze. "Clever girl. Yes, this medallion binds me to the curse, but it also gives me purpose. Without it, I'd be nothing but ash and memory." The pounding from above intensified, and pieces of the barn floor began raining down into the chamber. Whatever was up there was determined to get through. "Let me go," Sarah said, still struggling against his grip. "I'll leave Black Ridge and never come back. The curse can die with you." Henry's laugh was like wind through a graveyard. "The curse doesn't die, Sarah. It evolves, it adapts. It finds new hosts, new bloodlines to corrupt." He pulled her closer, his unnatural eyes boring into hers. "But with you, it can become something greater. The Walker line has always been strong. Your children would carry a pure strain of the infection." "I'll never have children." "Oh, but you will. The curse ensures reproduction. It drives its hosts to mate, to spread the infection to new generations. You'll feel the compulsion soon enough, an overwhelming need to find a partner, to create offspring who can carry the hunger forward." Sarah felt sick. Everything Dale Turner had told her was true. Her grandfather hadn't been trying to protect his family. He'd been trying to preserve the curse itself, passing it along to ensure its survival. A massive crash shook the entire chamber, and Sarah saw cracks appear in the ceiling. The red door behind her rattled in its frame, and she could hear voices on the other side. Human voices, but speaking in languages she didn't recognize. "My other descendants," Henry explained. "Those who accepted the curse willingly. They've been waiting decades for a new walker to join the family." "How many?" "Elias was just the beginning. Over the years, I've recruited others. People who came to Black Ridge looking for answers like you did. Scientists, researchers, treasure hunters. All of them now serve the greater purpose." Sarah glanced around the chamber, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. The candles flickered in their holders, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move independently. But among the dancing light, she spotted something that made her pulse quicken. More chains hanging from the far wall, similar to the ones in the barn above. "You chained yourself down here," she realized. "When you felt the transformation coming, you tried to stop it." Henry followed her gaze and nodded slowly. "For a while, yes. I thought I could resist, could find a way to break the curse through sheer willpower. But the hunger always wins in the end. The chains became tools of training rather than restraint." "Training for what?" "For you, Sarah. Everything I've done for the past 23 years has been preparation for your arrival. I needed to understand the curse completely before I could teach you to master it." Another crash echoed overhead, and this time Sarah heard wood splintering. The things in the barn were almost through. "They're not very patient," Henry said conversationally. "Most of them were turned involuntarily, and they haven't learned to control their appetites. That's why the bloodline matters. Those born to the curse have greater self-control." Sarah stopped struggling and let her body go limp. Henry's grip loosened slightly, and she used the opportunity to slam her elbow into his ribs. The impact would have disabled a normal person, but Henry barely flinched. Still, it was enough to make him adjust his stance, and Sarah managed to break free. She dove for the chains on the far wall, grabbing the longest one and wrapping it around her fist. The metal was cold and heavy, obviously silver, and it seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "Silver won't hurt me," Henry said, advancing slowly. "I'm already dead, remember? These chains were meant for the living cursed, not the guardian spirits." But as Sarah swung the chain at him, something unexpected happened. Where the silver links touched Henry's skin, smoke began to rise. He stumbled backward, his face contorting in what might have been pain or surprise. "Impossible," he breathed. "The guardian bond should protect me from—" Sarah swung again, wrapping the chain around his neck and yanking hard. The medallion's silver light flared, and Henry let out a sound like steam escaping from a boiler. Cracks appeared in his skin, revealing emptiness beneath, not flesh and bone, but shadow and smoke. "You're not my grandfather," Sarah said with sudden understanding. "You're just an echo, a memory given form by the curse." The false Henry's eyes widened. "Clever girl. But it doesn't matter what I am. The others are real enough and they're almost here." A section of the ceiling collapsed, revealing the barn above. Through the hole, Sarah could see shapes moving in the darkness, humanoid figures with too many limbs, faces that shifted between human and animal, eyes that glowed like coals in the shadows. "My family," the Henry thing said with obvious pride. "Aren't they beautiful?" Sarah pulled harder on the chain, and the medallion's light began to flicker. As it dimmed, the false Henry became more translucent, like a photograph slowly fading. "Breaking the anchor won't save you," he whispered. "They know you're sent now. They'll hunt you wherever you go. Then I'll have to make sure they can't follow." Sarah gave the chain one final, desperate yank. The medallion snapped free from the Henry thing's neck and clattered to the floor. Immediately, the figure began to dissolve, his form breaking apart like smoke in a strong wind. "The curse will find another way," his voice echoed as he faded. "It always does." As the last traces of her grandfather's false memory disappeared, the chamber began to shake violently. The candles went out one by one, plunging Sarah into near darkness. Above her, the creatures in the barn let out synchronized howls of rage and loss. Sarah snatched up the medallion and ran for the red door. It opened easily now that the guardian was gone, revealing a narrow tunnel that seemed to stretch into endless darkness. Behind her, more of the ceiling collapsed as the cursed things above began dropping into the chamber. She ran blindly through the tunnel, one hand trailing along the stone wall for guidance. The medallion in her other hand pulsed with weak light, just enough to reveal the path ahead. Behind her, she could hear pursuit, the scratch of claws on stone, the rasping breath of things that should have been dead. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, sloping gradually upward. Sarah's lungs burned and her legs felt like lead, but the sounds of pursuit drove her forward. The curse's servants were fast, but they seemed reluctant to venture too far from their underground nest. Finally, she saw light ahead. Not the artificial glow of candles, but honest sunlight filtering through what looked like a cave entrance. Sarah burst out of the tunnel and found herself standing on a rocky hillside about a mile from the ranch. Below her, she could see the barn, its roof now partially collapsed. But even as she watched, new figures emerged from the wreckage, dozens of them, shambling and crawling and loping across the desert floor. They spread out in all directions, some heading toward the road, others moving toward the abandoned town of Black Ridge. Sarah looked down at the medallion in her hand. It was warm to the touch, and she could feel something moving inside the silver. A presence that seemed aware of her, studying her, measuring her potential. As she stood on the hillside, breathing hard and trying to process what she'd experienced, Sarah realized that her problems were far from over. The false Henry had been right about one thing. The creatures knew her scent now, and with their guardian destroyed, they were free to spread beyond Black Ridge for the first time in decades. The curse was no longer contained, and Sarah, carrying the guardian's medallion, might be the only thing standing between the infected and the outside world. She had two choices: run as far as she could and hope the curse would eventually burn itself out, or stay and try to find a way to destroy it permanently. Looking down at the medallion, feeling its weight and warmth, Sarah made her decision. She was going to end this, even if it killed her. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was fighting. And that meant returning to town and finding someone who knew more about the curse's true nature. Margaret Delacroix had mentioned the Navajo knew about this place. Maybe it was time to learn what the indigenous people understood about the hungry ground of Black Ridge. As Sarah started down the hillside toward her car, she didn't notice the lone figure watching her from the shadow of a distant mesa. Dale Turner stood motionless against the red rock, his two bright eyes tracking her every movement. The gas station owner had been changed by the curse, but he'd never been broken by it. And now that the guardian was gone, he had his own plans for the Walker girl and her inherited burden, plans that had been 23 years in the making. Sarah drove straight back to Roswell. her hands shaking on the steering wheel. The medallion sat on the passenger seat, pulsing with that eerie silver light every few seconds like a metallic heartbeat. Every time it flashed, Sarah felt something respond deep in her chest, an answering rhythm that seemed to sync with her own pulse. The library was closed when she arrived, but Margaret Delacroix's home address was listed in the phone book. Sarah found the librarian's house on a quiet residential street, a small adobe structure with a garden full of desert plants and protective charms hanging from the porch eaves. Margaret opened the door before Sarah could knock, as if she'd been expecting her. "You look terrible, dear," the older woman said, ushering Sarah inside. "And you smell like death and old fire." What happened at Black Ridge? Sarah collapsed into a chair in Margaret's living room and told her everything. The underground chambers, the false Henry, the creatures, the Guardian's medallion. Margaret listened without interruption, her face growing paler with each detail. "May I see it?" Margaret asked when Sarah finished. Sarah handed over the medallion. The moment it left her fingers, she felt a sharp pang of loss, as if something vital had been torn away. Margaret examined the piece carefully, her fingers tracing the lunar symbols etched into the silver. "This is much older than I thought," Margaret said finally. "These symbols aren't just decorative, they're a binding spell. Navajo origin, but modified by someone who understood both indigenous magic and European alchemy. What does that mean? It means your grandfather wasn't the first person to try to control the curse. Someone else came before him, someone who understood what they were dealing with." Margaret set the medallion on her coffee table, and immediately Sarah felt the urge to snatch it back. "Tell me, how do you feel when you're not touching it?" "Anxious, incomplete, like part of me is missing." Margaret nodded grimly. "It's bonding with you, just as it bonded with Henry. The medallion doesn't just contain the Guardian's power, it creates new Guardians. Every person who carries it long enough becomes part of the curse's defense system." Sarah stared at the medallion in horror. "How long do I have?" "Hard to say. The transformation usually takes weeks, but you already carry the curse in your bloodline. The process might be accelerated." Margaret stood and walked to a bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes. But there might be another way. She pulled down a thick book and began flipping through its pages. "I've spent 40 years researching what happened in Black Ridge, trying to understand the curse's true nature. The official story is that it's a supernatural infection, something that spreads from person to person like a disease." "That's not true?" "Oh, it's partially true. But the curse isn't just random, it's purposeful, intelligent. It's been growing stronger for over a century, and it has a specific goal." Margaret found the page she was looking for and showed it to Sarah. The text was handwritten in multiple languages, English, Spanish, and what looked like Navajo pictographs. According to the indigenous oral traditions, Black Ridge sits on what the Navajo call a star wound, a place where something from outside our reality broke through long ago. The wound never fully healed, and it's been slowly widening ever since. Sarah studied the diagrams on the page. They showed a spiral pattern centered on Black Ridge, with lines radiating outward like cracks in glass. "The curse isn't trying to spread randomly," Margaret continued. "It's trying to widen the wound enough for whatever's on the other side to come through completely. Every person it infects becomes an anchor point, helping to tear reality a little bit more. Then we have to stop it." "We?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Dear, I'm 73 years old. My fighting days are long past. But you might be uniquely positioned to end this." "How?" "The curse needs the Walker bloodline to complete its work. Your family carries a specific genetic marker that makes you ideal anchors, but that same marker might also make you capable of closing the wound permanently." Margaret turned to another page, showing a detailed ritual diagram. "This is called the blood binding. It would require you to return to the exact center of the star wound, the place where your grandfather burned Elias Crow, and use your own life force to seal the breach." Sarah stared at the page. "That sounds like a suicide mission." "It probably is. but it's the only way to ensure the curse dies with you instead of spreading to others. Before Sarah could respond, the lights in Margaret's house flickered and went out. In the sudden darkness, the medallion on the coffee table blazed with silver light, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "They've found you," Margaret whispered. Through the living room window, Sarah could see shapes moving in the street outside. Humanoid figures that moved with inhuman grace, their eyes glowing in the darkness. There were at least a dozen of them, and more were arriving every moment. How is that possible? We're 50 miles from Black Ridge. Distance doesn't matter to them now that you carry the Guardian's medallion. It's like a beacon. They can follow it anywhere. Margaret grabbed Sarah's arm. "Is there another way out of this house?" "The back door leads to my garden, but it's surrounded by a 6-foot fence." Sarah picked up the medallion, and immediately the creatures outside became more agitated. They pressed against the windows, their faces distorting as they tried to push through the glass. "The medallion is calling to them," Sarah realized. "As long as I have it, they'll keep coming. But if you abandon it, the curse will just choose a new guardian, someone less prepared, less aware of what they're fighting." The front window exploded inward, showering the room with glass. A figure crawled through the opening, something that had once been human but was now stretched and distorted, its limbs extended to impossible lengths. Its face was a nightmare combination of human features and animal instincts. Margaret pulled a shotgun from behind her bookshelf and fired. The blast caught the creature's center mass, sending it tumbling backward. But even as it fell, more shapes were crowding through the broken window. "Run!" Margaret shouted, pumping another shell into the chamber. "Take the book and get to your car." Sarah grabbed the research volume and bolted for the back door. Behind her, she could hear Margaret's shotgun roaring and the inhuman sounds of the cursed things as they swarmed into the house. The garden was a maze of desert plants and decorative stones. Sarah sprinted toward the back fence, clutching the book and the medallion. As she reached the wooden barrier, something landed on the roof above her, a wet, slithering sound like a giant snake. She looked up to see one of the creatures clinging to the eaves, its neck extended to an impossible length as it reached down toward her. Sarah dodged just as its claws raked the air where her head had been. The fence was too high to climb quickly, but Sarah spotted a gate near the corner of the yard. She ran for it, fumbling with the latch as more creatures poured over the fence from all sides. The gate swung open just as hands, or things that had once been hands, grabbed for her shoulders. Sarah threw herself through the opening and into the alley behind Margaret's house. Her car was parked on the street in front, but the entire area was now swarming with the cursed. Sarah could see at least 30 of them, and more were emerging from the shadows every moment. They moved in perfect coordination, like a hive mind responding to a single will. As she watched from the alley, the creatures suddenly stopped their advance and turned as one to look directly at her hiding place. Their eyes glowed like stars in the darkness, and when they smiled, their teeth were all wrong. Too sharp, too numerous, arranged in patterns that human mouths were never meant to accommodate. Sarah realized with growing horror that they weren't just hunting her randomly. They were playing with her, herding her exactly where they wanted her to go. And where they wanted her to go was back to Black Ridge. The shotgun fire from Margaret's house had stopped. In the terrible silence that followed, Sarah heard her car's engine start. One of the creatures, one that still looked mostly human, sat behind the wheel of her Honda, its two bright eyes meeting hers through the windshield. It honked the horn once, a normal sound that was somehow more terrifying than any monster's roar. Then it began driving slowly down the street, leading the pack of cursed things away from Margaret's house and toward the highway. They were giving her a choice: follow them willingly or watch them spread across the countryside, infecting every person they encountered in their search for her. Sarah looked down at the medallion in her hand. It pulsed faster now, its light brighter and more insistent. Whatever intelligence controlled the curse was running out of patience. She had perhaps an hour before they reached Black Ridge. An hour to decide whether to attempt Margaret's ritual and risk death, or surrender to the curse and become its willing servant. As she started walking toward the highway, following the distant taillights of her stolen car. Sarah opened Margaret's book and began reading by the medallion's silver glow. If she was going to die tonight, she wanted to understand exactly what she was dying for. And if she survived, she needed to know how to make sure the star wound stayed closed forever. The walk back to Black Ridge took 3 hours. Sarah followed the highway in the darkness, staying just far enough behind her stolen car to avoid being spotted, but close enough to keep the taillights in sight. The medallion's weight seemed to increase with every step, pulling at her like a lodestone. Margaret's book was a treasure trove of information about the curse's history. According to the research, the star wound had been created in 1847, when a military expedition encountered something in the desert, something that should never have existed in our reality. The expedition's commander, a man named Josiah Walker, had tried to contain the breach using a combination of military explosives and Navajo binding rituals. Sarah stopped walking and reread the name. Josiah Walker. Her ancestor. The pieces began falling into place. The curse hadn't randomly chosen her family line. It had been bound to the Walkers from the beginning. Josiah had damaged whatever was trying to break through, but he hadn't destroyed it. Instead, he'd created a genetic lock that required Walker blood to either seal the breach permanently or open it wide enough for the entity to fully emerge. For over a century, the curse had been working to gather enough Walker descendants to complete the summoning. Her grandfather hadn't been protecting his family by passing the curse to others. He'd been buying time, keeping the Walker line alive until the right astronomical conditions aligned. And according to the book's astronomical charts, those conditions would be perfect tonight. The new moon would reach its darkest point at exactly 3:17 a.m., creating a null space in the lunar cycle that would weaken the barriers between realities. Sarah checked her phone, 1:45 a.m. She had 90 minutes to reach Black Ridge and decide whether to complete Josiah Walker's work or become the final component in an alien summoning ritual. As she crested the hill overlooking the ghost town, Sarah saw that Black Ridge was no longer empty. Dozens of vehicles were parked along Main Street, cars, trucks, motorcycles, even a few RVs. The cursed had been gathering from across the region, drawn by the medallion's call and the approaching convergence. But these weren't the shambling monsters she'd expected. As Sarah made her way through the outskirts of town, she could see them clearly in the moonlight, and they looked almost normal, almost human. A woman in a business suit stood next to a BMW, checking her phone as if she were waiting for a meeting. A family of 4 sat on lawn chairs outside their RV, the children playing with toys while their parents watched with patient smiles. An elderly man in overalls leaned against a pickup truck, smoking a cigarette and staring at the stars. But their eyes all glowed with that same unnatural light. And when they noticed Sarah walking past, they turned to follow her progress with movements that were just slightly too coordinated, too precise. "Sarah Walker," called a voice from the darkness. Dale Turner stepped out from behind a building, but he looked different, cleaner, more composed, as if the wild desperation she'd seen at the gas station had been replaced by calm certainty. "Right on time." "Stay back," Sarah warned, raising the medallion. Its light flared and several of the gathered cursed flinched away. Dale laughed. "I'm not here to fight you, Sarah. I'm here to welcome you home." He gestured toward the assembled crowd. "We all are. These people are infected." "These people are free," Dale corrected. "Free from doubt, from fear, from the endless struggles that define human existence. The curse doesn't destroy, it perfects." A young man in a college sweatshirt approached them, his movements eerily graceful. "I was dying of cancer," he said conversationally. "Stage 4 pancreatic. The doctors gave me 2 weeks. That was 3 years ago." "The curse healed you?" "The curse made me better than healed. I don't age, I don't get sick. I don't feel pain unless I choose to." He smiled, revealing teeth that were too white and too sharp. "All I had to give up was my humanity, and honestly, humanity is overrated." More voices joined in, each person sharing their story of transformation. A woman who'd been paralyzed in a car accident could now move with superhuman speed. A man who'd been born blind could now see across vast distances and perceive colors that didn't exist in the normal spectrum. A child who'd struggled with severe autism could now communicate telepathically with any of the cursed. "You see," Dale said, "we're not victims. We're the next step in human evolution." Sarah looked around at the transformed faces, trying to see the horror she expected to find, but instead she saw contentment, peace, joy. These people weren't suffering, they were genuinely happy. "What about the hunger?" she asked. "The need to hunt and kill?" "Oh, that's still there," Dale admitted. "But we've learned to channel it productively. We hunt animals mostly, or people who won't be missed. Criminals, drifters, those who prey on the innocent." He shrugged. "It's really quite sustainable." The college student nodded enthusiastically. "We're apex predators, but we're not wasteful. We take what we need and leave the rest of the ecosystem alone." Sarah felt the medallion pulse in her hand, and with each flash she could sense the emotional states of everyone around her. What she found was disturbing not because of its darkness, but because of its sincerity. These people truly believed they'd found a better way to exist. "You're trying to convince me to join you," Sarah realized. "We're trying to show you that there are alternatives to the black and white narrative you've been fed," Dale replied. "You think you have to choose between staying human and becoming a monster. But those aren't the only options." A new voice spoke from behind Sarah. "The third option is to become a god." Sarah spun around to see the creature that had stolen her car. Up close, it was obviously no longer entirely human. Its proportions were wrong, its movements too fluid, its presence somehow larger than its physical form. But when it spoke, its voice carried an authority that made her bones ache. "You are Josiah Walker's heir," the creature said. "His blood flows in your veins, along with the genetic key that can unlock the final barrier. We have waited 178 years for this moment." "What are you?" "I am what your ancestor called the Hungerer. I am what waits beyond the star wound, seeking entrance to your reality." The creature's form shifted slightly, becoming more human in appearance. "Your world is dying, Sarah Walker. Your species destroys everything it touches. I offer something better: synthesis, evolution. A chance for humanity to transcend its limitations." Sarah felt the medallion growing hot in her hand. "By making everyone into monsters? By making everyone into survivors? Your current form is temporary, fragile, doomed to extinction within centuries. What I offer lasts forever." The Hungerer gestured toward the assembled crowd. "These are my firstborn children in your reality. They carry the best of both worlds, human consciousness combined with my endurance and strength. And all it costs is free will." "Free will is an illusion," Dale interjected. "You think you're making choices, but you're really just responding to chemical impulses and social conditioning. We've transcended that. We act from genuine desire, not from programming." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. In the medallion's light, she could see that each person bore subtle marks of transformation. Elongated fingers, teeth that were too sharp, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. But she could also see intelligence there, personality, individual quirks and preferences. "If I refuse," she asked. "Then the convergence fails," the Hungerer admitted. "The star wound remains partially sealed, and I must wait for another astronomical alignment. Perhaps decades, perhaps centuries. And these people will continue as they are, trapped between worlds, neither fully human nor fully transformed. They will hunt and feed and reproduce, but they will never achieve their true potential." The Hungerer stepped closer, and Sarah could feel waves of alien presence washing over her. It was like standing next to a bonfire, not painful, but impossible to ignore. "But if you cooperate," it continued, "I can complete the synthesis. Every person on Earth will have the choice to evolve or remain as they are. No more forced transformations, no more hunting in the shadows, just the opportunity for humanity to become something greater." Sarah felt the medallion's pulse synchronizing with her heartbeat. The transformation was accelerating. She could feel changes beginning deep in her cells, her DNA rewriting itself according to patterns that had been waiting in her bloodline for generations. "I need time to think," she said. The hungerer smiled with teeth like broken stars. "Time is the one thing we do not have. The convergence window lasts only 17 minutes, and it begins in—" It paused as if consulting some internal chronometer. 14 minutes. Sarah looked up at the sky. The moon was gone, leaving only a void in the starfield where it should have been. The darkness felt alive, pressing down on her like a physical weight. Around her, the assembled cursed began to move with purpose, forming a procession that led toward the ranch. Sarah found herself walking with them, not by choice, but because the medallion was pulling her forward like a magnet. "Where are we going?" she asked Dale. "To the center," he replied, "to the place where it all began, where your ancestor first touched the wound and bound himself to its guardian." As they walked through the desert night, Sarah realized that her decision was already being made for her. The medallion had become part of her nervous system, its alien intelligence merging with her own thoughts. She could feel the hungerer's presence growing stronger with each step, and her human consciousness growing weaker. But somewhere in the depths of her transforming mind, she remembered Margaret's words about the blood-binding ritual. And as the procession reached the ruins of her grandfather's ranch, Sarah began to understand that there might be a fourth option, one that neither the cursed nor the hungerer had considered. She could complete the convergence, and then immediately seal the wound, trapping the alien entity forever between realities. All it would cost was her life, and the lives of everyone who carried the curse. As the assembled crowd formed a circle around the burned patch of ground where Elias Crow had died, Sarah clutched the medallion and prepared to make the most important choice in human history. The moment Sarah stepped onto the burned ground, reality warped around her. The desert night dissolved like smoke, replaced by visions that felt more real than memory. She was standing in the same spot, but it was 1847, and Josiah Walker's military expedition was making camp after 3 days of pursuing something across the territorial Badlands. "You need to see this, sir," a young soldier called out, his voice echoing across time to reach Sarah's ears. Through the medallion's power, Sarah experienced her ancestors' memories as if they were her own. She watched Josiah approach a crack in the desert floor that pulsed with sickly light. The fissure was roughly human-shaped, but wrong in every detail. Too long, too narrow, with edges that hurt to look at directly. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Josiah asked. "We found it this morning, sir. It wasn't here yesterday." The soldier's face was pale with fear. "And, sir, things have been coming out of it." As if summoned by his words, something began emerging from the crack. It was roughly humanoid, but impossibly tall, its limbs stretching like taffy as it pulled itself into their reality. Where its flesh touched the normal world, the air itself seemed to decay. Josiah's men opened fire, but their bullets passed through the creature as if it were made of mist. It turned toward them with a face that was constantly shifting, never settling on any single configuration of features. "Your reality is so limited," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "So finite. I offer expansion, evolution, partnership." "Demon!" one of the soldiers shouted, pulling out a silver cross. The creature laughed. "I am no demon, small one. I am what your children's children will become if they are wise enough to accept my gifts." Sarah felt Josiah's determination through the medallion's connection. Her ancestor was a practical man, a soldier who understood that some battles couldn't be won through conventional means. He pulled out a leather pouch filled with silver dust, a gift from a Navajo medicine man who'd warned him about things that lived in the spaces between worlds. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Josiah called to a Hispanic soldier, "you speak the old tongue. Start the binding chant." As Rodriguez began reciting words in Spanish and Navajo, Josiah threw the silver dust in a circle around the fissure. The creature inside shrieked as the powder touched its emerging form, its flesh smoking where the silver made contact. "You cannot bind me forever," it hissed. I will find another way. Through your bloodline, through your descendants. The wound will widen, and I will have my freedom. Then my bloodline will be the key that keeps you locked away, Josiah replied grimly. He pulled out a knife and sliced his palm, letting his blood drip onto the silver circle. I bind you to the walker blood. You cannot fully emerge without our willing participation. The creature's form began dissolving back into the fissure, but its final words echoed across the desert. Your great-granddaughter will be mine. The one who carries the moon's mark. She will open the door you have closed. The vision faded, and Sarah found herself back in the present moment. But now she understood the true nature of her inheritance. The curse wasn't trying to destroy the Walker line. It was trying to create the perfect descendant, someone with just the right combination of genetic markers and psychological flexibility to serve as the Hungerer's permanent anchor in reality. Around her, the assembled cursed had begun changing. Their human disguises were falling away like shed skin, revealing the alien hybrid forms beneath. Dale Turner's face elongated, his jaw unhinging to accommodate rows of needle-sharp teeth. The woman in the business suit split open down her back, revealing membranous wings that shouldn't have been able to support her weight. It's beginning, the Hungerer said from somewhere behind her. The convergence. Can you feel it? Sarah could feel it. The medallion was burning against her palm, and her own body was responding to its call. Her bones ached as they began restructuring themselves. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual dust motes floating in the air. Her sense of smell became so acute that she could distinguish the emotional states of everyone in the circle by their scent alone. Fight it, she whispered to herself. But fighting required will, and her will was being systematically dissolved by the alien presence flooding through the medallion. The burned ground beneath her feet began to crack, revealing the same sickly light that Josiah had seen in 1847. But this time the fissure was much wider, and the Hungerer's form was much more substantial as it began pulling itself through. 178 years, it said, its voice now coming from its emerging physical form, rather than from the air around them. 178 years of waiting, planning, preparing, and now, finally, the door opens. Sarah tried to step away from the fissure, but her feet seemed rooted to the ground. The medallion's chain had somehow fused with her nervous system, its silver links visible beneath her skin like an alien circulatory system. Why me? She asked. Why not my grandfather? Why not my parents? Your grandfather lacked the proper psychological flexibility, the Hungerer explained as more of its form emerged. Your parents died before the genetic expression reached maturity. But you... Its face, when it finally solidified enough to have features, was almost human, almost beautiful. You have the perfect combination of Walker genetics and modern adaptability. You can serve as my permanent anchor without losing your essential self. Anchor? The bridge between my reality and yours. As long as you live, I can maintain a stable presence in your world. When you die, I die with you, unless I have successfully reproduced and created offspring who can take your place. Sarah felt something move inside her abdomen, and she looked down in horror to see her belly beginning to swell. No, that's impossible. The transformation includes accelerated reproduction, Dale explained, his voice now coming from a throat that was clearly no longer human. The Hungerer's genetic material integrates with yours, creating hybrid offspring in a matter of hours rather than months. This is insane. This is evolution, the Hungerer corrected. Your species' next step forward. In 9 hours, you will give birth to the first generation of true human-alien hybrids. They will be stronger than humans, more intelligent than humans, more beautiful than humans, and they will inherit the best aspects of both realities. Sarah's mind raced through Margaret's research, looking for any information about the blood-binding ritual. The text had been vague, but she remembered something about using the Guardian's life force to seal the breach permanently. If she could somehow reverse the medallion's effect, turn its power inward instead of outward. You're thinking about sacrifice, the hungerer observed. How noble, how human. But you cannot destroy the medallion. It's already part of your cellular structure, and you cannot kill me without killing everyone who carries my gift. Around the circle, the transformed cursed were swaying in unison, their alien features reflecting the fisher's light. Sarah could sense their thoughts now, their absolute certainty that they were participating in something glorious and necessary. Maybe they were right. Maybe humanity's current path really was leading to extinction. Maybe the hungerer's offer of synthesis was genuinely better than the alternative. But as Sarah felt the alien offspring growing inside her, she realized that it didn't matter whether the transformation was objectively good or bad. What mattered was choice, the right to decide for themselves what humanity would become, and that choice was being taken away from every person on Earth. "I have a counter-proposal," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The hungerer paused in its emergence, its form now 3/4 solid. "Oh? You want permanent access to our reality. I want humanity to keep its freedom to choose. So let's make a deal." The creature's eyes, all 7 of them, focused on her with predatory interest. "What kind of deal?" "I'll serve as your anchor willingly. I'll bear your hybrid children and help them integrate into human society. But in exchange, you stop the forced transformations. No more hunting, no more infection, no more converting people against their will." Dale started to protest, but the hungerer silenced him with a gesture. "Interesting," it mused. "You would sacrifice your freedom to preserve theirs. I would sacrifice my freedom to preserve their choice," Sarah corrected. "If humans want to join you, they can do so voluntarily. If they want to remain human, they have that right." The hungerer was quiet for a long moment, considering her offer. Around them, the assembled cursed waited with inhuman patience. "Very well," it said finally. "I accept your terms, but understand, once you are fully transformed, you will see things differently. You may decide that forced evolution is actually mercy. Maybe, but that will be my choice to make." The medallion flared with blinding light, and Sarah felt the final stage of transformation begin. Her human consciousness started dissolving into something larger, more complex, alien in its scope and perspective. But as the change overtook her, Sarah held on to one last thought. The blood-binding ritual required the willing sacrifice of the Guardian's life force. She was about to become the Guardian, and when the time came, she would have the power to choose whether the star wound remained open or closed forever. The hungerer thought it had won. But Sarah Walker was about to become something that had never existed before, a fully transformed hybrid who retained her essential humanity. And that might be enough to save both species. The transformation was like being reborn through fire and starlight. Sarah's human consciousness didn't disappear. It expanded, incorporating new senses and perspectives that her original mind couldn't have contained. She could feel the thoughts and emotions of every cursed being within a mile radius. She could see the flows of energy that connected all living things. She could taste the electromagnetic signatures of different realities where they intersected. But most disturbing of all, she could feel the hungerer's offspring growing inside her, already developing at an impossible rate. They weren't just human alien hybrids. They were something entirely new, combining the best aspects of both species while eliminating the weaknesses of each. "How do you feel?" the hungerer asked, its form now fully materialized in their reality. Sarah stood slowly, marveling at her body's new capabilities. Her muscles felt like coiled steel cables, and her bones had the density of adamant. When she looked at her hands, she could see the faint silver tracery of the medallion's power running beneath her skin like decorative tattoos. "Powerful," she admitted. "More than I ever imagined possible." "And the children?" Sarah placed her hands on her swollen belly, feeling the alien heartbeats within. "They're aware. Even now, they're learning, absorbing knowledge from both our species' genetic memories." The hungerer nodded with satisfaction. They will be perfect ambassadors between our kinds, neither fully human nor fully alien, but something greater than either. Around them, the assembled cursed were returning to their more human forms, but Sarah could see through their disguises now. Each one carried unique modifications, enhanced senses, improved reflexes, cognitive capabilities that far exceeded normal human limits. They weren't monsters. They were evolutionary experiments. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we wait," Dale replied. "The children will be born within hours, and they'll mature to functional adulthood within days. Once they're ready, we can begin the real work of integration, which is introducing the hybrid offspring to human society gradually," the hungerer explained. "They'll appear to be gifted children, unusually intelligent, unusually healthy, unusually capable. Over the course of a generation, they'll integrate into human institutions and begin implementing changes from within." Sarah felt a chill despite her transformed physiology. "You're talking about infiltration. I'm talking about guided evolution. Your species is headed for extinction. Climate change, resource depletion, social collapse. Left to your own devices, humanity has perhaps 50 years before civilization breaks down completely." The hungerer's alien features rearranged themselves into an expression of genuine concern. "My children will help you avoid that fate. By taking over? By providing leadership. By solving problems that humans lack the wisdom or will to address themselves. By building a sustainable future for all Earth's inhabitants." Sarah could sense the sincerity in the hungerer's mental emanations. It truly believed it was offering salvation rather than conquest. But she could also sense the deeper currents beneath its conscious thoughts. The alien hunger for expansion, for territory, for the complete transformation of Earth's biosphere into something more suitable for its kind. "You promised no more forced transformations," she reminded it. "And I will honor that promise. The children will work within human systems, using persuasion and example rather than infection. Those who choose to join us will do so voluntarily." But even as it spoke, Sarah could feel the hungerer's true intentions through their psychic link. The no forced transformation rule would last only until the hybrid children were firmly established in positions of power. After that, the definition of voluntary would become increasingly flexible. She had perhaps a few hours before her human perspective was completely subsumed by her alien inheritance. A few hours to decide whether to honor her bargain or find a way to destroy both herself and the entity that was using her as an anchor. The problem was that she could no longer see a clear moral distinction between the two choices. From her transformed perspective, the hungerer's vision of humanity's future actually looked appealing. A world without war, without poverty, without the endless struggles that defined human existence. A world where everyone had access to enhanced capabilities and extended lifespans. The fact that it would no longer be recognizably human seemed less important than it had before her transformation. "I need to hunt," Sarah said suddenly, surprised by the words coming out of her mouth. The assembled cursed nodded with understanding. "The offspring require specific nutrients that normal food cannot provide," Dale explained. "You'll need to feed on living creatures, preferably those with complex nervous systems." "You mean people?" "Ideally, yes, but large mammals will suffice if you're uncomfortable with that option." Sarah felt her new instincts stirring, analyzing the scent signatures of everyone around her. Part of her mind was already calculating the most efficient ways to kill each person in the circle. But another part, the part that still remembered being human, recoiled from such thoughts. "I won't hurt innocent people." "Then hunt the guilty," the hungerer suggested. "Your enhanced senses can detect moral corruption as easily as they can detect fear. There are predators in your cities, people who prey on the weak and helpless. Hunt them." The logic was seductive, and Sarah found herself nodding. If she had to kill to feed the hybrid offspring, why not make their death serve a greater purpose? "There's a truck stop about 20 miles south of here," Dale said. "It's a known hub for human trafficking. At least a dozen genuine monsters pass through there every night. Sarah's new senses could already detect the emotional resonances from that direction. Fear, desperation, cruelty, exploitation. Her hunting instincts locked onto those signatures like a heat-seeking missile finding its target. "Go," the hungerer encouraged. "Feed our children. Protect the innocent by eliminating the guilty. Embrace what you've become." Sarah found herself moving before she consciously decided to hunt. Her transformed body covered ground at an impossible speed, flowing across the desert landscape like liquid shadow. The truck stop appeared in her enhanced vision, long before it came into normal sight range, a cluster of lights surrounded by the heat signatures of dozens of human beings. Most of the signatures were normal, tired, stressed, but fundamentally decent people trying to make a living. But several blazed with the twisted resonance of deliberate cruelty. Sarah's instincts led her to a parked semi-trailer where she could smell the terror of captive children. The driver was in the truck stop's diner, bragging to his companions about his human cargo. Sarah listened from the shadows as he described the children he was transporting, 12 kids between the ages of 8 and 14, destined for buyers who would use them in ways that didn't bear thinking about. Her human conscience demanded that she call the police, contact the FBI, work within legal systems to rescue the children. But her alien instincts offered a more direct solution. Sarah's transformed body moved with predatory grace, flowing into the diner through a ventilation grate. The human trafficker never saw her coming. One moment he was laughing at his own crude jokes. The next, something with silver eyes and impossible strength was dragging him out the back door. The feeding was ecstatic. Sarah had expected to feel revulsion, but instead she felt a deep satisfaction as her alien digestive system processed the trafficker's life force. The nutrients flowed directly to the developing offspring, and she could feel them responding with gratitude and accelerated growth. But more than that, she could feel the man's memories and experiences being absorbed along with his physical essence. Every cruel act, every moment of sadistic pleasure, every rationalization for his evil, all of it became part of her knowledge base. And through that knowledge, she began to understand just how many human monsters existed in the world. How many people who would never be missed, whose disappearance would actually make the world a better place. By the time she finished feeding, Sarah's perspective had shifted even further from its human origins. The hungerer wasn't proposing the destruction of humanity. It was proposing the elimination of humanity's worst elements, while preserving and enhancing its best. She freed the captive children and left them with enough money to get home safely, erasing their memories of their captivity in the process. Then she returned to the truck stop and systematically hunted down the trafficker's associates, 5 men and 2 women who had built a lucrative business on human suffering. Each feeding made her stronger, more capable, more convinced that her transformation served a greater good. By the time she returned to Black Ridge, the hybrid offspring had reached near-term development, and Sarah's human identity had become just one layer in a much more complex psychological structure. "How do you feel?" the hungerer asked as she rejoined the circle. "Like I understand the purpose now," Sarah replied honestly. "Like I can see what needs to be done." The hungerer smiled with genuine pleasure. "And what needs to be done?" Sarah looked around at the assembled cursed, beings who had once been human but had become something greater. Then she looked out across the desert toward the distant lights of human civilization, with all its beauty and ugliness, its potential and its limitations. "We need to save them from themselves," she said finally, "whether they want to be saved or not." The hungerer's 7 eyes blazed with triumph. "Welcome to the family, Sarah Walker. Welcome to the future." But deep in the transformed depths of her consciousness, the last remnant of Sarah's original humanity held on to Margaret's words about the blood-binding ritual. She was now the guardian, bound to the star wound by alien power and walker blood. And when the time came, when the hybrid children were born and the hungerer's presence in reality became stable, she would have the power to choose whether that presence continued. The question was whether she would still want to exercise that power, or whether her transformed perspective would make such thoughts seem as obsolete as childhood fears of the dark. The offspring kicked inside her, and Sarah smiled with teeth that were no longer entirely human. Soon she would find out exactly what kind of mother she was going to be. The birth began at dawn, just as the first rays of sunlight touched the desert horizon. Sarah felt the onset like a tide of silver fire rushing through her transformed body. The hybrid offspring had been developing for less than 12 hours, but they were ready to enter the world. The assembled Cursed formed a protective circle around her as she knelt on the burned ground. The star wound pulsed beneath the earth, its alien light synchronizing with the rhythms of her labor. Each contraction sent waves of energy through the medallion fused to her nervous system, and she could feel the hungerer's presence growing stronger with every breath. "They're coming," Dale said, his voice filled with reverence. "The first generation of the new species." Sarah gritted her teeth against the pain, but it wasn't the agony she'd expected from human childbirth. Her transformed physiology was designed for this process, and her enhanced nervous system converted the discomfort into something almost pleasurable, a burning intensity that felt like touching the raw stuff of creation. The first child emerged in a rush of silver fluid that seemed to absorb the dawn light. She was perfect, recognizably human but enhanced in every detail. Her skin had a subtle luminescence, her eyes held intelligence far beyond that of a newborn, and when she opened her mouth to cry, the sound carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions Sarah couldn't name. "Beautiful," the hungerer breathed, its alien features softening with something that might have been parental pride. "She carries the best of both our kinds." Before Sarah could process the implications of that statement, the second child began emerging. Then the third, the fourth. By the time the birthing process ended, 7 children lay in the silver fluid around her, 4 daughters and 3 sons, each one perfect in their own unique way. But as Sarah looked down at her offspring, she felt something unexpected: maternal protectiveness. These weren't just alien experiments or evolutionary stepping stones. They were her children, carrying her genetic legacy as much as the hungerer's alien inheritance. "What are their names?" she asked, surprised by the normalcy of the question. "They will choose their own names when they're ready," the hungerer replied. "For now, they need only to grow and learn." Sarah watched in fascination as the children began changing before her eyes. Their infant bodies were developing at visible speeds, gaining size and coordination with each passing minute. Within an hour, they appeared to be toddlers. Within 3 hours, they looked like young children. And they were learning just as rapidly. Their enhanced brains absorbed information from every source, the genetic memories built into their alien inheritance, the psychic emanations of the assembled Cursed, the electromagnetic patterns of the surrounding environment. They were becoming educated by simply existing. "When will they be ready to begin their mission?" Sarah asked. "Soon," the hungerer said. "By tonight, they will have the apparent age and knowledge base of human teenagers. Within a week, they will be indistinguishable from young adults. We can begin placing them in human institutions immediately." Sarah nodded, but something nagged at her transformed consciousness. As she watched her children develop, she noticed that their alien enhancements were becoming more pronounced rather than less. Their eyes glowed brighter, their movements became more fluid, their communications shifted increasingly toward telepathic exchanges rather than verbal language. They were evolving away from humanity, rather than toward the hybrid synthesis the hungerer had promised. "They're not going to be able to pass for human," Sarah observed. "Not in their current form, no," the hungerer admitted, "but they can learn to mask their true nature when necessary. Shapeshifting is a simple matter of genetic expression control." To demonstrate, one of the children, the eldest daughter, concentrated for a moment, and her glowing eyes shifted to normal brown. Her luminescent skin became ordinary pale pink. Her 2 perfect features became merely beautiful rather than otherworldly. But Sarah could sense the effort required to maintain the disguise. Her children would be constantly suppressing their true nature to blend in with humanity. They would be living lies, pretending to be something they weren't in order to manipulate the species they were meant to save. "Is this really better?" Sarah asked. "A future where my children have to hide what they are. It's a transitional phase," Dale said. "Once humans become accustomed to enhanced individuals, the children can reveal more of their true capabilities. Eventually, normal humans will be the minority, and shape-shifting will become unnecessary." Sarah felt her maternal instincts warring with her expanded consciousness. Part of her wanted to protect her children from the burden of deception. Another part recognized the necessity of gradual integration, but a deeper part, the part that still remembered being human, wondered whether this was actually the salvation the hungerer claimed it to be. "I want to see something," Sarah said suddenly. "What?" "I want to see what the world would look like if my children succeeded, if humanity became fully integrated with your kind." The hungerer's 7 eyes focused on her with intense interest. "Are you certain? The vision might be overwhelming for your partially human consciousness." "Show me." The hungerer reached out with one impossible hand and touched Sarah's forehead. Immediately, her enhanced senses exploded outward, carrying her consciousness across space and time to witness possible futures. She saw Earth 50 years later, gleaming cities that grew like living organisms, their architecture flowing and organic rather than rigid and geometric. The sky was clean, the oceans were clear, and the climate had been stabilized through biotechnology that human science couldn't have developed for centuries. The planet's inhabitants were recognizably descended from humans, but they had been perfected. Disease was extinct. Aging was optional. Physical and mental capabilities had been enhanced to levels that seemed godlike by current standards. But as Sarah's vision penetrated deeper, she began to see the costs of that perfection. Individual creativity had been largely eliminated in favor of collective consciousness. Privacy was impossible when everyone shared telepathic links. Personal growth and self-discovery had become obsolete when psychological optimization could eliminate character flaws instantly. The beings in this future were happy, healthy, and productive, but they weren't human in any meaningful sense. They were living extensions of the hungerer's will, beautiful and perfect, and utterly without the messy unpredictability that made humanity special. "Do you see?" the hungerer asked as the vision faded. "Suffering eliminated, want eliminated, conflict eliminated, perfect harmony between all inhabitants of the planet. And freedom eliminated," Sarah added quietly. "Freedom to make mistakes, freedom to cause suffering, freedom to destroy themselves and their environment." The hungerer's alien features showed what might have been puzzlement. "Why would you consider such freedom valuable?" Sarah looked down at her children, who were now approaching the apparent age of young teenagers. They were beautiful and brilliant, and capable of wonders that no human could achieve. But as she watched them interact, she realized that they moved and thought and spoke in perfect harmony. They weren't 7 individuals. They were 7 aspects of a single consciousness. They had never known the chaos of human sibling rivalry, the uncertainty of personal identity formation, or the struggle to find their own paths in life. They were perfect in every way, except the ones that mattered most. "Because freedom to make mistakes is what makes us human," Sarah said finally. "Without that freedom, we're just sophisticated tools." The hungerer's expression shifted to something that might have been disappointment. "I had hoped your enhanced perspective would allow you to see beyond such primitive attachments." Sarah felt the weight of the medallion in her transformed nervous system, pulsing with the power that bound the hungerer to their reality. She was the anchor, the guardian, the living bridge between worlds. And as the guardian, she had the authority to make decisions about the star wound's status. "I have a new proposal," she said. "Oh?" "Close the star wound, return to your own reality. Leave humanity to develop naturally." The assembled cursed stirred restlessly, and Sarah could sense their alarm through the psychic links. Dale stepped forward, his transformed features showing confusion and concern. "Sarah, you can't be serious. We've come so far. Your children are the key to humanity's survival. Maybe, Or maybe humanity's greatest strength is its willingness to survive on its own terms, even if those terms are imperfect. The hungerer's 7 eyes blazed with sudden anger. You would condemn your entire species to extinction, rather than accept help. I would preserve their right to choose their own path, even if that path leads to extinction. Sarah could feel the power building in the medallion, responding to her will as the guardian. The silver tracery beneath her skin began to glow brighter, and the star wound beneath their feet started to pulse erratically. You cannot do this, the hungerer said, its alien voice taking on harmonics that made reality itself seem to vibrate. I will not permit it. You don't have a choice, Sarah replied. I'm the guardian now, the anchor, and I choose to cut the chain. She reached deep into the medallion's power, feeling the ancient binding that Josiah Walker had created over a century ago. With her enhanced consciousness, she could see how to reverse the process, how to seal the star wound permanently, while sending the hungerer back to its own dimension. But as she began the ritual, she realized the cost. The power required would consume not just her own life force, but the life force of her children and everyone else who carried the curse. Every person who had been transformed would die when the connection was severed. Sarah hesitated, looking around at the assembled cursed. These people had found meaning and purpose in their transformation. They had become something greater than human, even if it meant losing their humanity in the process. Did she have the right to make that choice for them? Mother, a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see her eldest daughter, now appearing to be about 16 years old. We understand what you're considering. Do you? We can sense your thoughts through the familial bond. You believe our existence is a violation of human autonomy? Sarah nodded. I think humanity deserves the right to evolve naturally, even if it means making mistakes. Her daughter smiled, and for a moment she looked entirely human. Then let us make that choice too. What do you mean? Give us the same freedom you want to preserve for humanity. Let us choose whether to live or die with the sealing of the star wound. Sarah stared at her daughter in amazement. Despite their alien inheritance, despite the hungerer's genetic programming, her children had developed the capacity for individual choice. I choose to live, the eldest daughter continued, but as myself, not as an extension of the hungerer's will. I want to experience humanity's chaos and uncertainty. I want to make mistakes and learn from them. One by one, her other children joined the conversation, each expressing their own perspective on the choice before them. 2 wanted to return with the hungerer to its alien dimension, curious about their otherworldly heritage. 3 chose to remain on Earth but without the curse's binding, willing to become mortal in exchange for true freedom. 1 remained uncertain, asking for time to decide. This is impossible, the hungerer said, its 7 eyes darting between the children. You are extensions of my consciousness. You cannot choose independently. But we are, the second daughter said simply. Mother's humanity infected us through the genetic bond. We carry her capacity for individual choice, along with your enhancements. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. Her children were exhibiting the very quality she most valued about humanity, the messy, unpredictable ability to choose their own paths. But that choice was about to cost some of them their lives. The hungerer's form began to destabilize as it realized its perfect plan was unraveling. You will destroy everything. Without the curse to guide them, humans will destroy their planet within decades. Maybe, Sarah admitted. Or maybe they'll surprise us all and find a way to survive and thrive on their own terms. She could feel the medallion's power reaching critical mass. The decision had to be made now, before the convergence window closed, and the opportunity was lost forever. I'm sorry, she said to the assembled cursed, many of whom had become friends over the past few hours. I know this isn't what you wanted. Dale stepped forward, his transformed features showing resignation rather than anger. It's what you have to do, he said quietly. I've been trapped between worlds for 23 years. Maybe it's time to choose one or the other. Sarah nodded and reached deep into the medallion's power core. The ancient symbols carved into the desert floor began to glow as she reversed Josiah Walker's binding ritual. Instead of keeping the star wound partially open, she was sealing it completely. The hungerer let out a sound like breaking glass as the dimensional bridge began collapsing. Its form started dissolving back into the fissure, but its final words echoed across the desert. "You have doomed them all. When the climate wars begin, when the resources run out, when civilization collapses, remember that you chose this." "I chose freedom," Sarah replied, "even the freedom to fail." The star wound began closing with a sound like thunder rolling backward. One by one, the assembled cursed collapsed as the alien energy that sustained them was severed. Some dissolved entirely, returning to the dust they should have become years ago. Others simply became human again, gasping and confused but alive. Sarah felt her own transformation beginning to reverse. The silver tracery faded from her skin, and her enhanced senses dimmed to normal human levels. The medallion crumbled to powder in her hand, its purpose finally fulfilled. Her children were changing too. The two who had chosen to follow the hungerer dissolved into light and vanished through the closing star wound. The three who chose mortality began aging rapidly, their alien enhancements burning away like morning frost. Within moments, they appeared to be normal human children, still beautiful, still intelligent, but no longer superhuman. The uncertain child made her choice at the last moment, grabbing Sarah's hand and choosing to remain human. 4 children, where there had been 7. 4 chances for humanity's future to include something new and wonderful, but not overwhelming. As the star wound sealed with a final flash of alien light, Sarah collapsed to her knees on the burned ground. She was human again, tired, mortal, limited, but free. Dale Turner crawled over to her, his own transformation reversed. He looked like a normal man in his 60s, confused and disoriented but unmistakably human. "Is it over?" he asked. Sarah looked around at the scattered survivors, maybe a dozen people who had been cursed and were now simply human again. In the distance, she could see the abandoned vehicles of those who hadn't survived the severing. "It's over," she confirmed. Her 4 remaining children gathered around her, looking like any normal family despite the extraordinary circumstances of their birth. They would grow up human, with only traces of their alien heritage remaining in their enhanced intelligence and intuitive understanding of the natural world. They would be bridges between humanity's present and future, but they would build those bridges through choice and cooperation rather than manipulation and conquest. As the sun rose fully over the New Mexico desert, Sarah Walker stood up and brushed the dust from her clothes. She had inherited a curse and chosen to break it. She had been offered godhood and chosen humanity instead. Now she had to figure out how to get her children home and start building the kind of future worth having, one choice at a time. 6 months later, Sarah sat in a coffee shop in Santa Fe, watching her children through the window as they played in the plaza outside. To any observer, they looked like normal kids. Marcus, age 8, chasing pigeons with scientific curiosity. Elena, 7, reading a book that was probably too advanced for her apparent age. The twins, David and Maria, 6 years old, building elaborate structures from playground equipment that shouldn't have been able to support their architectural ambitions. Only Sarah could see the subtle signs of their heritage, the way Marcus seemed to understand the pigeons' behavioral patterns intuitively. How Elena absorbed information from books at speeds that would have impressed graduate students. The twins' unconscious ability to work together as if they shared a telepathic connection. They were gifted children, but they were children. They had nightmares, threw tantrums, argued over toys, and asked endless questions about the world around them. They were wonderfully, chaotically human. "Dr. Mitchell?" A voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah looked up to see Dr. Rebecca Chen, the geneticist from Los Alamos who had been studying the blood samples Sarah had voluntarily provided. Dr. Chen was one of the few scientists who knew the true story of what had happened at Black Ridge, and she'd been monitoring the children's development with fascination and concern. "Please sit," Sarah said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. What did the latest tests show? Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of genetic charts. The children's DNA is stabilizing. The alien markers are still present, but they're becoming increasingly dormant. It's as if their human heritage is asserting dominance over the otherworldly elements. Is that good or bad? It's remarkable. Their genetic structure is rewriting itself to favor human characteristics, while retaining beneficial enhancements. They'll live longer than normal humans, be resistant to most diseases, and have cognitive capabilities in the 99th percentile. But they'll age normally, reproduce normally, and die normally. Sarah felt a wave of relief. She'd been terrified that her children would eventually manifest powers that would set them apart from humanity entirely. There's something else, Dr. Chen continued. We've been monitoring the Black Ridge site with various instruments. The dimensional readings have completely normalized. Whatever breach existed there has been permanently sealed. And the other survivors? All healthy, all normal. Dale Turner opened a new gas station in Albuquerque and seems to be adjusting well to purely human existence. Margaret Delacroix has written a book about the experience, though she's presenting it as fiction. The others have scattered across the country, but our follow-up interviews suggest they're all rebuilding their lives successfully. Sarah nodded, watching Marcus discover that the pigeons would eat crumbs from his hand if he remained perfectly still. Any regrets about the choice we made? Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. From a scientific perspective, we lost an incredible opportunity to study an entirely different form of life. The advances we could have made in medicine, technology, space exploration, it's staggering to consider. But I've been studying your children for 6 months, and I've learned something important. The most valuable traits they inherited weren't the alien enhancements. They were the human ones. Their curiosity, their empathy, their capacity for individual growth and unexpected choices. Those are the characteristics that make them special. Through the window, Sarah watched Elena help a younger child who had fallen off the playground equipment. The girl's intuitive understanding of first aid was clearly beyond her apparent age, but her gentle bedside manner was pure human compassion. The hungerer claimed it was offering evolution, Sarah said. But what it was really offering was optimization, making humans more efficient, more perfect, more controllable. It couldn't understand that our flaws and uncertainties aren't bugs to be fixed. They're features that make us who we are. Dr. Chen smiled. Your children prove that point beautifully. They're enhanced but not perfected, gifted but not superhuman. They represent the best possible outcome, improvement without the loss of essential humanity. A commotion outside caught their attention. A small crowd had gathered around the twins, who had apparently built a sculpture from playground materials that defied conventional engineering principles. David and Maria stood beside their creation, beaming with pride as adults tried to figure out how the structure could possibly be stable. Should I be worried about that? Sarah asked. Only if you're planning to discourage their natural creativity, Dr. Chen replied. They're going to push boundaries their entire lives. The question is whether they'll use their gifts to build bridges or walls. Sarah stood up and walked outside to collect her children. As she approached the crowd, she heard fragments of conversation. Impossible without some kind of internal support structure. Kids these days are so much smarter than we were. Must have learned it from some online video. The adults were rationalizing what they'd seen, fitting it into their understanding of normal human capabilities. Sarah realized that was exactly what would happen throughout her children's lives. Their gifts would be noticed, but explained away, appreciated, but not feared. Mom, Elena called out, running over with her book. I finished reading about quantum mechanics, but there are some parts I don't understand. Can we go to the library? Of course, sweetheart. But first, help your brothers clean up their sculpture. As her family worked together to dismantle the impossible structure, Sarah felt a profound sense of contentment. The future was uncertain, full of challenges that humanity would have to face without alien intervention. Climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, All the problems the Hungerer had promised to solve were still waiting to be addressed. But they would be addressed by humans, in human ways, through human choices. And maybe, just maybe, her children would be part of the solutions. Not as alien overlords guiding an inferior species, but as human beings contributing their unique perspectives to the collective effort. Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Chen said as they prepared to leave, there's one more thing. We've detected similar dimensional anomalies at 3 other locations around the world, ancient sites where the barrier between realities might be thin. Sarah felt a chill. Are you saying there might be other breaches? Dormant ones, sealed long ago by people who faced similar choices to yours, but they're still there, waiting. And someday, someone else might have to decide whether to open them or keep them closed. Sarah looked at her children, who were now chasing each other around the plaza with typical kid energy. In 20 years, they would be adults. In 40 years, they might be the ones standing guard against threats that humanity couldn't imagine. When that time comes, she said quietly, I hope whoever makes the choice remembers that freedom is more valuable than perfection. As they walked back to their car, Marcus tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Mom, why do grown-ups always want to understand everything? Isn't it more fun when things are mysterious? Sarah smiled and ruffled his hair. Sometimes, sweetheart, but understanding helps us make better choices. What if we make the wrong choices? Then we learn from our mistakes and try to make better choices next time, even if the mistakes are really big. Sarah thought about the Hungerer's offer, about the perfect future it had shown her, about all the suffering that humanity might have avoided if she'd made a different choice. Even then, she said firmly, because the right to make mistakes is one of the most important rights we have. As they drove home through the New Mexico sunset, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The children are beautiful. You chose well. A friend from the spaces between. Sarah deleted the message without showing it to anyone. Some mysteries were better left unexplored, but as she tucked her children into bed that night, she whispered a promise to each of them. Whatever choices you make in your lives, make them freely. Make them as yourselves, not as what others want you to be. And in the darkness outside their windows, the desert wind carried that promise across the vast New Mexico landscape, past the sealed wound at Black Ridge, past the ghost town where humanity had faced its greatest test and chosen its own uncertain future over someone else's perfect plan. The curse was broken. The star wound was sealed. And 4 children who carried the best of 2 worlds slept peacefully, dreaming human dreams under alien stars.